Welcome, my friends, to another episode of Shoot First, Ask Questions Later. After an episode a while back on the topic of seeing eye dogs in shul and also about Rav Nosson Zuber, our previous guest from a few episodes ago, Rabbi Jeffrey Sachs, rightly pointed out that instead of just mentioning him in passing, we were overdue for an in-depth discussion about Rav Mordechai Pinchas Teitz, and we couldn't think of anyone better than our esteemed guest who is with us today, Dr. Rivkah Blau. Dr. Blau served as an adjunct professor at Stern College and began teaching Torah when she was just 15 years old. She's been a teacher, principal, lecturer, and author in the decades since. Her doctoral thesis at Columbia was on Psalms and English poetry, and she's a member of the editorial board of Tradition. The book Learn Torah, Love Torah, Live Torah, her biography of her father, Rav Mordechai Pinchas Teitz, who is the subject of today's episode, was published in Eretz Yisrael as V'samachta b'chayecha, conveys his approach of Torah knowledge for everyone while enjoying what is good in the modern life. She and her husband, Rav Yosef Blau, are the parents of Rabbis Binyamin, Yitzchak, and Yaakov Blau, who all teach Torah and are carrying on the remarkable rabbinic and Torah legacy of the family. So I think many of our listeners have likely heard Rav Teitz mentioned in passing before. I think what unfortunately happens, and as Chatin Ani Masker Hayom, we talk about the seeing eye dog tshuva, we talk about the blended whiskey tshuva, and it's always like in the context with Ramosha Feinstein that people tend to be aware. But I want to just talk about Rav Teitz as Rav Teitz. And maybe you could give us, you don't have to summarize the entire book, but just a little bit of an acquainting with your father.
I think the best thing to say about my father is that he always saw a good side to everything. He was a very optimistic person. And instead of decrying the fact that we had lost everyone in Europe, which certainly he felt very, very strongly, he thought that here in America, we had an opportunity to forge a whole new Torah culture. And he thought that we would have to change a few things. Obviously, Yiddish was not going to be the language of this culture, it was going to be English. And although there were some objections to his saying it so clearly, but he was right. And in the end, English has won out. He also thought that we should try to portray Orthodoxy in the best possible light, which meant that you build modern buildings, you get the best secular education possible, as well as the best Jewish education possible, and in every way, bring out the richness of Jewish life so that a young person thinking about what his or her path should be would say, I think I ought to really find out about my own tradition. And that's what he was hoping for. I'll just mention that he saw day schools as the key to the whole thing. Because if children came into day school and liked what they found there, an entire family and an entire community could change. So he always said that he could judge a person's rabbinate by whether the person had started a day school in the 1950s and 60s.
Wow.
And it's true. That's really... But everyone looks now at the day school movement. That's what made Judaism flourish.
Right. We take that for granted today. This is being recorded in 2024, where we take for granted that we have all these Jewish day schools. But that was really the difference between whether the next generations would be practicing observant Jews or not, whether their parents got a day school education.
And I always tell that both Rav Soloveitchik and my father, Zichronam Livracha, had a hard time convincing parents to send children to day school. The also public schools were the answer. So Rav Soloveitchik used to say to worried parents who thought he might make their son a rabbi, no, I don't want to make him a rabbi. I just want to make him a knowledgeable layman. Father used to say, I know what rabbis go through. Would I do that to an innocent child? I'm not rabbis. So
that's
true.
And so something, I noticed, because I know the topic we're going to be talking about today is I guess you could call it a tshuva that he submitted and he published in the HaPardes journal. Now, you mentioned that he was making the argument that, we had to adapt and learn English and we couldn't just speak in Yiddish. I was looking at the front matter of the book. This is an audio, it's a podcast, so people won't see it, but I don't know if you've ever noticed that there's an advertisement for Coca-Cola becoming kosher, and it's like all in Yiddish. It's saying like it's gesund, it's geschmack, it's all these big Yiddish words that I'm not going to pretend I know. So that was the culture that he was still participating in when
Right.
he wrote this tshuva in, what was it, the 1950?
1951. The we're going
1951.
to discuss is 1951. Yeah.
So before we jump into the particulars of this topic, maybe
Yeah.
just give us an overview of what were some of the key issues that he had to address during his rabbinate.
Uh, I think one of the biggest things was getting people to feel that being a shomer mitzvot, being an observant person, was a very fine person to be. He used to say, be modern, be orthodox. Or he used to say, the Torah speaks the language of tomorrow. He didn't want people to feel it was a relic. And in fact, one of his favorite interpretations in the Torah, to which our son Yaakov, at 4 years old, told my father, you know, Zadie, you said that last year on the same time. And my father was thrilled that he listened and he remembered. But my father was used to say, Lo Bashamayim he, Lo Me'avrahayam he. People said when they got here, oh, if I were heavenly like an angel, I could keep the Torah. And if I were on the other side of the Yam, of the Atlantic, I could keep the Torah. Mm-hmm. But here it's possible. And he would follow up with the next pasuk, Beficha ubelvavcha lasoso. It's in your heart. All you have to do is make the decision. And that's what he was trying to help people do. I would say that one of the people he admired was Rabbi Ephraim Buchwald, because he thought this trying to get everybody to learn how to read Hebrew, that was critical. Because if a person comes into shul and has no idea what to do with the siddur, he's lost already right there. And he also used to give a course in the geography of the siddur. So people should know what's going on. That was this whole thing. Let people know.
And this was all in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Is that where he immediately went upon coming to America?
Yeah, well, just a quick thing. It's in my book, but I'll just say it quickly. He met my mother, whose father had been a Telz star, and whose rabbi in Elizabeth, but unfortunately passed away. And he and Rav Meir Bloch arrived in America on behalf of Telz on my grandfather's shloshim. And everybody said, oh, they have to meet each other. Here's somebody who knows Telz, and her father was a Telzer. They didn't want to meet each other because he wasn't coming just to get somebody's rabbinate, and she wasn't going to marry just to have a rabbi in town. But when they actually met each other, they found each other very interesting. This history. So my father became the Rav in 1935.
Wow.
But then he did a lot of things outside of Elizabeth. For example, you hear about this with the let me just think of how many things I'm going to try to say. All right, I'll just say this. He did for Russia, for example, 22 trips in the 60s and the 70s when it was not safe to go behind the Iron Curtain. But he felt that wherever you are, you have an obligation to try to help others. That was the function of being a Jew. And he acted accordingly. Could I just mention, just at the beginning, we're on a podcast. Do you know that 75 years ago, besides the fact that nobody ever heard of a podcast then, but people thought that modern technology and Torah did not meet. And what my father did in 1953, when he started a radio program of Talmud on the air, was to break that notion and to say modern technology should be used for teaching Torah, just as you are doing here. At the time, though, it was met with a lot of criticism. And people said, it says in the Gemara, don't teach Torah bashuk in the marketplace. You don't want any non-Jews to hear Torah being taught. All kinds of arguments that this should not be done. What's interesting is who came to my father wrote his own defense, that the biggest problem in America is ignorance, and we have to spread Torah. But the 3-day Aish, let me just think, Rav Moshe Feinstein, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, that's the caliber of the people who said it's fine. And Rabbi Yitzchak Herzog sent a message from Israel. Maybe this is why Hashem allowed the radio to be invented. That now you have Torah tapes, all these things, and podcasts, and it was a revolution that he started, and thank God it took off.
Wow, we just take it for granted that we could. It's a little bit breaking the fourth wall over here, but we take for granted that we could be sitting right here recording a podcast. Had it not been for Rev Teitz revolutionizing that, who knows whether it would have been that acceptable throughout the Torah world. It's remarkable that he was a trailblazer in that respect.
Right, and that's what he was in a lot of respects, including building a mikveh wherever one could. A lot of things that And he helped other towns to do it because he felt it's not just Elizabeth, it's across the country. And thank God it's worked.
Wow.
Yeah,
So this is a, of course you wrote an entire book about your father's life, and these are just some of the Rashi Prakim, some of the just few details for someone who was not aware that they should know. But let's now pivot a little bit and try to get a glimpse and appreciation for his scholarship. So HaPardes was one of the premier rabbinic journals in the, I guess, early mid 20th century in America,
exactly.
and many rabbanim who didn't necessarily publish full volumes of shalos or tshuvos, they would still author tshuvos and put it in HaPardes, and that seems to be what we're looking at today. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, it was like opening a discussion. When you put an article in HaPardes and it went out to rabbis across the world, but primarily in America, in the United States and Canada, you expected people to read it and discuss it. Some agreed, a lot disagreed, but it was a wonderful conversation. And nobody was afraid of putting an idea out and letting other people comment. It was a very self-confident time. But I guess people who learned in Slobodka and Telz and Mir and other places like that, they were pretty confident about their Torah.
You had some good credentials.
So it really worked out well. It was a learned discussion. And yes, it had ads for Coca-Cola at the front. Learned discussion, and people could join in. So even the tshuva that we're going to discuss today, I mean, my father covered a range of things that all had to do with living in 20th century America and how one fares and how one can keep the Torah. So one of the questions that came up, and this he printed in 1951, was that the Allies found after World War II, when they came to Germany, that there were warehouses full of Hebrew books. There were also secular books, but lots and lots of lumdus there. And they didn't know what to do with all these books. So they contacted the Joint Distribution Committee, the Joint, and asked if they could distribute them. And they sent them out to yeshivos and shuls across the world. Now, I'm told by someone who knows, Svi Erenyi at the YU Library, that there are still books that nothing was done with them because it was too many to handle. My father got his share in Elizabeth, and he started looking through. He saw that there were the names of people who had owned these Seforim written at the front, and sometimes the names of shuls stamped on the inside of the front cover. So he started questioning, do we have to let people know that we have their Seforim? Are we obligated to try to find the person himself, halavai that person survived? Do we give it to his heirs? And do we have to find a shul? If there's still anybody left, if there's still anybody who belonged to that shul? So he brought that up as a question on HaPardes, and he thought that there might be two answers. But my father was very open to other kinds of ideas. So yes, he gave two answers, but then he gave a lot of counter answers and wanted people to come and say what they thought. One answer was yeush, despair. There are certain conditions where you just despair of ever getting something back. So maybe that was how people felt. So maybe anyone who would get one of those farm now could say the owner despaired and it's mine. And another way was mishum kibush milchama, that if something got despoiled, got taken, got looted in war, you could assume that the owner gave up hope of ever getting it back.
And that's a remarkable idea, because the first part is that there's despair. That's the perhaps the most obvious idea. Anyone who's done like Bava Metzia, learned Elam Metzias, knows
Right.
these halachas about Hashavas Aveda. But this is a concept that I don't think you see floated as frequently. As you point out, he said, "Hare kanu hachayalim haashkenazim es kol hashalam midin kivush melchama." This idea that we sometimes see in halacha, the halachos that regulate wartime are unique sometimes from regular civilian halacha, and that an army can kind of make their own kinyan on it. I mean, I'm just thinking, I know before we record this session, we were talking about how this might be analogous in certain ways to the British Museum, how during the British Empire, when they colonized every single inch of the earth, and they brought back spoils from the places they conquered. And now there's an ongoing controversy about if they should be returning everything back to the original nations. This is the Jewish manifestation of the issue, but it's a broader ethical question throughout the entire world.
It's very much a broader question. And there's another Jewish manifestation. all the artworks that were looted from Jewish people or that were bought under terrifying circumstances, with $1 paid by a Nazi for a $500,000 painting. And in fact, when I looked up the word reparations, the first thing I found was for any artworks from Europe between 1933 and 1945, one has to check the provenance. One has to check where it came from, whose hands it went through, because most likely it was looted by the Nazis. I'm sure you've seen there have been articles about this. Kandinsky, a Surat, a Pissarro, some of them ironically by Jewish artists, bought by Jewish connoisseurs, looted by the Nazis, and then the museum that gets them decides, why should we return it? It's a nice $1 million piece, we'll keep it. So it's not a simple business, but where the courts have been much more free about announcing whether it should be returned or not to the heirs who know the painting. They remember it in an aunt's house. They know that painting. So sometimes they return to the Jewish people, and sometimes they decide, well, in the Netherlands, for example, they've decided again and again that belongs in the museum. That's not the Jewish way. The Jewish way is to investigate much more carefully.
So right. So he gives two rationales, either Yeush, that there's despair, or Kivish Milchama.
Right.
So is that ultimately where he concludes on the matter? He says we don't have to worry about returning all the Seforim. That's it.
No, he goes through a whole conversation about it. I won't tell you everything, but I'll just give you highlights. And at the end, he says, really, if you can, you should return it. But if you cannot return it, then learn in it, because it should be used. The Seforim should be used. And meanwhile, try to find how to return it. He was not accusing anybody of doing the wrong thing by not returning it, because there was ample argument on their side, but he thought we should try to return it. I'll mention just as a side thing that when my parents used to go to Europe after the war, in Paris and London, wherever my father went, he would go to the Seforim stores and he would look to see if any of the Seforim stores had names that he recognized. He would buy the sefer and return it to the person.
Wow.
But sometimes my mother told me, sometimes the Seforim had blood on them, and he would take them and he would bury them because it was the blood of a Jewish person, obviously. And that's what we faced after the war. That kind of trying to restore things and trying to rectify things. It was not a simple life.
That is very harrowing. And yeah. I think the point that he makes also is that, well, if you're not going to go through the tircha of trying to get it back to the right person, the Seforim aren't just supposed to be put on a shelf and left there. I think if from what I heard, if people want to purchase a Kilas Yaakov, they had to make a commitment that they were actually going to learn and not just put it as ornament on their shelf.
Right. Not just a prize, not a token, a real thing. Yeah. Now,
so was there anything in terms of anything else we should know about this particular teshuva he put in HaPardes, the reception, or any other of his rulings that you think are important for us to know?
Mention quickly, though, that there isn't a notion that a government that takes things keeps it, and then you can't hope to get it back. So if somebody is selling it and paid for it, you can pay them for that sefer, and you can take it yourself. But you can't take stolen things. And that's where the whole question comes in of what to do. For example, there's a question of if something is in the mouth of a lion or something is on fire. Well, if you save something from that, can you keep it because you've gone to such danger to do it? And maybe we can think that the Nazis who burned and destroyed shuls with all this farm, that maybe it's like Zuto Shel Yam, like the waves of the ocean. It's lost, it's gone. Or Shul Shel Nahar, the currents of a river. Again, in both cases, we could think it's lost to the owner, but it's lost to everyone. So therefore, if you find it, you don't have any obligation. It's yours. But my father questioned that. And he said that, yes, sometimes the Germans did burn Seforim, but if they were putting them in a separate place to store them, maybe we can't say it's Zuto Shel Yam. You can't say that it's lost to everyone. It's there. It's in the warehouses. It's in your yeshiva. It was sent to you. So maybe you have some obligation to return it. It's interesting that he went back so far. He went back to Seforim from 1384, Tashbetz, the Shuvos of Shimon ben Semach. It turns out that then you also had things being stolen by governments and pirates. And what happened to Yisrael, who would buy one of those things, and another Yisrael would say that it's his. So there's all kinds of distinctions that get made between metaltalin, which are objects that can be carried, just physical objects, and Seforim. Seforim are at a whole different level. They're on a level of kedusha, of holiness, and every attempt should be made to return them. He gives so many comparisons in such depth. I'll just say quickly a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
Know or don't know the value of what you have. So he said, for example, non-Jews do not know the value of a sefer. As far as they're concerned, it's only worth the paper that it's on. The paper is worth something, but they have no idea that the words written on it are what make it valuable. So he compares it to not knowing the value of a stone, which may be a jewel, or something in a pile, or something inside a wall, or something that appears to be tin, but is actually silver. And how obligated are you to let the non-Jew know, look, I want to buy that sefer, and you're not trying to fool him, but he doesn't know what it means to you. So it's all kinds of questions.
That's a fascinating angle I didn't think about, which is, do you have to be concerned for like a mekach that you're deceiving the non-Jew, that he doesn't know the worth of the Torah that he's selling to you
for $1, when for you would pay $1,000 to get that sefer.
That's remarkable.
And he says at the end that since it's the machlokas haposkim, there is a difference of opinion about this. If it belongs to a shul, you must return it if you can possibly do so. But if it belongs to an individual and you're having trouble finding where that individual is, you still have to try. What I'm struck by is how deeply he goes into the question of, are you fooling someone? Are you taking something that was stolen? Are you responsible to return something? And then, as you say, look at what goes on with the governments, with museums keeping things that they know belong to Jewish heirs. So it's a different world in the non-Jewish world.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, definitely. And I'll make sure to put the citation in the show notes. So, and I'll mention to our listeners, I have a PDF of this on my computer. So any listener is welcome to email me, mitchellmkurtz@gmail.com. I'll send you a PDF of the teshuva and HaPardes. But as Dr. Blau said, there's a lot of nuanced considerations that we're not going to cover all of them here now, but it just comes to show how great of a scholar his erudition was.
Yeah. And also the footnotes. I'm not even talking about the footnotes, but they're fascinating also. But it does show that when he researched the topic, it was thoroughly looked into. Yeah.
Absolutely. So other than this topic, which of course is very compelling in of itself, and I think it just reflects the post-war rabbinate and state that he was in, picking up the pieces in America. What other kind of interesting issues did he have to deal with? Did he have to rule on in his rabbinate that we should know about?
Well, two quick things. One that he didn't write about, but that was an interesting approach. When people wanted an eruv in Elizabeth, he was concerned, and my brother was concerned, the two of them discussed it. What if people come to a place and don't realize that you have to check whether there's an eruv and start carrying and not knowing that there's no eruv here? And why did my brother think that? His brother-in-law, Yehuda Blum, was the Israeli representative to the United Nations. He came to Elizabeth for a Shabbos, and he was carefully tucking a nice silk, handkerchief into his suit pocket. And my brother said to me, Yehuda, are you under the impression that there's an eruv here? He said, of course, who doesn't have an eruv? So that's why they decide. But what did they do? Once a year, I don't know if they're still doing it now, but when they first started it, once a year, they announced that the eruv was down, and they taught Hilchos Eruv, so that everybody should know, including the children, that when you come to a new place, just ask, is there an eruv? And they can get used to the fact that maybe there's one Shabbos a year. You can't wheel your baby carriage to shul. You can't carry your keys to shul. It was a good way to introduce it.
Right, it's like Shlotishkach Torah's Erevin. It's funny because I grew up in Far Rockaway, New York. I can think of only seldom, very few occasions where there wasn't. And the thing is, back then, you look at the case in the Gemara about Eruv Chatzeros, everyone in the Chatzer, they knew that at someone's house there was the box of matzahs or challah there. There was more of an awareness of it, it seems, from Talmudic times. And today, you're like, oh, there's some string somewhere or a fence, or maybe it's a phone wire. Some people don't even know how their Eruvin are constructed.
Right.
And people just aren't even aware that there's that Havamina that, oh, wait, maybe I can't carry on Shabbos, depending on where you grow up.
Exactly. I will tell you that Samson Bechafer, whose name is Samson Raphael Bechafer, so you know what kind of family he comes from here in
Mhm.
Washington Heights.
Yeah.
There's in his apartment for this whole apartment house. So he does that besides the fact that other people trust the general air, but he has that for the building. I want to talk about something that happens not that infrequently. It's called hypospadias, and what it means is that the opening of the urethra, the top of the penis, didn't form correctly, and instead it's on the bottom instead of being at the top.
Mm.
And of course, this is not good. First, for urinating, the boy will not be able to urinate standing up. He'll have to sit down to urinate. And of course, it's important for Pru Revu because it's not easy to have sexual relations that way. Well, I would think that this was not a frequent thing. But when I read my father's teshuva and I went to investigate, according to the Mayo Clinic, it happens 1 in 200 births of baby boys. And according to the Columbia Presbyterian, no, it only happens in 1 in 150
That's not
baby.
rare at all. Wow.
That's not rare. And if surgery is done immediately, it can be corrected and there will be no problem for the boy. And it has to do with some kind of formation not having happened properly in the tube of the urethra. And that's why this came out this way. But it's frequently done. There's a lot of surgery. In fact, there are places on the internet that are advertising that they do it. If you want to go to India, you can have it done really inexpensively. So it tells you this is a problem around the world. And what my father did was to look into whether the surgery could be done before the bris milah, which is what the doctors recommended, because the surgery should heal first, and then the bris milah can be properly done, and the child will not suffer. It's done when the baby is young, when the anesthesia does not bother him, and the discomfort for a day or two is over, and then it's a regular bris milah, a regular circumcision. So that didn't garner opposition, but that was just an interesting treatment of something that had to be brought into the open. What's interesting is, as I mentioned to you, I know 2 people who had that with their sons. One was very calm about it because he knew about the teshuva, and he knew, let the baby have the surgery. Don't worry about the bris not being on time. It'll be a few days late. We're fine. The other one did not know, and he was very, very upset. What's wrong with my child? What's wrong with this baby? And how can I explain to people that the bris will be late? And all he had to do was find out about this teshuva and realize it happens, and there's a way to correct it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's another one I never heard about. I think it's like so important. I'm so glad that we did this episode because myself included, and the Ganze Welt, everyone should know that Rav Teitz did a lot more than just the blended whiskey discussion. And it's a lot more than just, and when we were discussing topics, you said, we're not doing blended whiskeys again. There's a
Right.
lot more to discuss. And this is
Right.
just a sample of that.
Yeah. And, blended whiskey has not been settled yet. It's still in controversy. So let it rest.
Exactly. We don't want to get too into halacha l'maisa controversy.
Right.
So as we're drawing to a close, is there anything you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Um, I'd say one thing is think about the future. And I'll give one example. A mother came to the yeshiva. This was about 40 years ago. They were collecting shemos to bury, and she brought Seforim. And my father took a look at the Seforim, and he said, someone in your family must have been in big London because these are very fine books you have here. Doesn't anybody in your family want them? She said, oh, no, we're far away from it. There's no need for it. My father asked her, do you have any children? She said, yes, a son. He's in public school, but he was young. He was 6 years old. My father said, let him try the yeshiva for a year. And if it's good, let him continue. Don't worry about the tuition. My father always felt the tuition was the biggest enemy of Jewish knowledge in the world. He said he really felt that we should discard everything else and just see that every kid gets a Jewish education. So she said, okay. She wasn't paying for it. Okay. The boy took to it very well. And later on, about 20 years later at his wedding, he asked my father to perform it. And my father said, I never speak at weddings. He always felt the chuppah was beautiful by itself. You don't need any speech from a rabbi. And he also felt the couple was fasting. So get with it and don't take time up there. He said, I never give gifts at a wedding, but here I have to give a gift to this chatan. And he gave him the books from his grandfather. My father saved them the whole time. And he said, these Seforim are what brought you to yeshiva and to the life that you're leading now. And I think they belong to you. Imagine he was thinking so far ahead when he saved Seforim. Maybe this boy will be able to use them one day. And he saved them for him.
Wow. And I think that really speaks his career. He didn't just, we were talking about him saving Jews Sfarim, but he didn't just save the Sfarim physically. He saved,
Save the
the Jewish lives that lived through those Sfarim.
right,
That's
right.
remarkable. And this is just one of many inspirational and remarkable stories that you've been able to catalog in your book. And hopefully there'll be a reprinting at some point. That way our listeners who want to read it will be able to get their hands on it. But at least for now, they'll suffice with the episode. And I just want to thank you, Dr. Blau, so much for your time and of course for your expertise on this matter.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.